Today's lesson will be on the vertebrae of the human body. I brought a couple of friends of mine to help with the discussion. I'd like you to meet them, and I just want to make certain that we're all ready and good to go. Hey, yep, we're up, everybody set? Very good. All right, let's get started. Now, today we're going to discuss human vertebrae. Before we start with the model, I'd like you to recall some of the characteristics of the human spine. Remember, there are 5 regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. There are also curvatures to the spine from the lateral aspect that allow us to center the weight mass over our pelvis, period. They also accommodate different structures such as the thoracic viscera and the overweight, unbalanced region of the cranium, period. Also recall that as we advance our way down the spine, the vertebrae change a little bit in shape and size to adapt to the different needs and uses in that area. The first 2 vertebrae, the atlas and the axis, are very unique. We'll need to study those in detail in a different lesson. Beyond that, the cervical vertebrae are much more delicate, and they all have a unique characteristic called the transverse foramen. Passing on to the thoracic region, the vertebrae become a little bit larger and blockier, and a very large dorsal process to accommodate the muscles within the back. And getting into the lumbar region, the bones get blockier and chunkier. They have to support all that weight. The sacrum itself is fused, and the coccyx is just a leftover remnant from a tail that we no longer need or use. Today, we'll take a look at the lumbar model to illustrate some of the common characteristics of all vertebrae. I'm going to move forward. My face will go out of the screen and use the blue shirt as a background so that you can better see the model. Now, this is a model of 3 lumbar vertebrae. It's actually inverted. Let me get that in the correct fashion for you. Fooled you, didn't I? This particular vertebrae, all of these were used in my practice to demonstrate some of the different stages of degenerative problems within the spine. The superior vertebrae is the most normal in appearance. This particular area of lips and spurring, and down here, and even more advanced down here, is evidence of osteoarthritis. But the model still works to demonstrate the different parts we would like to address. This is an anterior view. This is a left lateral view. This is a right lateral view. And this is a posterior view. Let's take a look at one of the vertebrae head on to get an idea of the usual parts that we identify. First, here's the body of the vertebrae. It's sometimes called the centrum. Next, we have the house. You notice the 2 walls, here and here, and then the roof above it. The 2 walls and the roof make what's called the neural arch. You can see it coming across here. The neural arch actually opens into an opening called the vertebral foramen that houses the spinal cord. The roof is called the lamina, whereas the walls over here are called the pedicles. Above this area, you can see these projections of bone. Off to the side, you'll see other projections. The ones on the side are actually called transverse processes, whereas the one coming straight off the top here is a dorsal spinous process. Looking down, and from a posterior view, here's the dorsal process. These are the transverse ones. Watch as I move the vertebrae. You can see they actually have motion. There are 3 areas where the vertebrae has motion: the vertebral disc and the 2 facet joints. This particular projection here coming off just next to the transverse process would be the superior process, and this flattened area is the superior articular facet. You have an inverse process, and the flattened surface is the inferior articular facet. These areas are common to the lumbar vertebrae. And let's take a look at the spinal cord to get an idea of some of the lateral structures. Working our way down the spinal cord, you can see that it gives off spinal nerves, and here's one here and there's another there. The opening the spinal nerves comes out is actually between two vertebrae. If you lift that up, you can see how the superior half of the opening starts at the superior vertebrae and the inferior corresponds to the inferior vertebrae. This particular opening is called the intervertebral foramen. Recall that you have this large opening in the middle called the vertebral foramen. Let's talk about the intervertebral disc quickly to give you an idea of what we're looking at. The intervertebral disc in a normal adult are very similar to a jelly donut. The outer cover is a very tough and thick region called the annulus fibrosus, while the inner gel is called the nucleus pulposus. The terms you hear about slip disc and different things involved in that area really are kind of misnomers. The disc itself doesn't slip, but what you can have is a change in shape of the disc, or if you have part of the gel actually squirted out in areas where it shouldn't be, it's called a ruptured disc. You can imagine, and you can see one right here, that if this disc actually squirted some gel close enough to the spinal nerve, it would pinch the nerve and give you the symptoms corresponding to that nerve. Okay, that's today's review for lumbar vertebrae. Hope it's been helpful. Recall there are similar characteristics throughout the human body to all the vertebrae.